So we were talking about coddywampling. That means to set off in an intentional way towards an unknown direction. It means asking the right questions. And one of the things that we talked about last year in a time of disruption, in a time of liminality, in a time where we weren't really sure exactly where we were headed as a community, it became an opportunity for us, certainly as a vestry and as a staff, and as a large congregation, to think about who are we at the deepest level? What does it mean for an institution to have a soul? I submitted to you a theological claim that institutions as well as individuals carry a soul. And often, I like Parker Palmer's definition of a soul. You know, it's the thing when I wasn't even sure I wanted to be alive anymore. It was the thing that sustained me. I think that's true for institutions too. When we're not even sure who we are, there is something deeply embedded in our identity, in our past, maybe our history, who we are when we come together that sustains us when we're asking a lot of questions. And we've been asking a lot of questions as a community. We continue to ask those questions in the years to come. How does whiteness function at Trinity? What does it mean to be a congregation that historically anyway, has been largely white, largely upper middle class, largely professional, we might say? How does that shape our expectations about who we are, how we communicate with one another, how leadership happens here, how ministry happens here? How does a culture of whiteness, a white professional culture, work in a place like Trinity Cathedral? We're still asking that question. We're still exploring that question. Kind of related to that question, do we have a governance structure that allows our ministries really to thrive? And or is it time to start looking at how our ministries, how our vestry, finance, budget, buildings and grounds, how all of the governance that makes Trinity work, is it time to kind of take a deeper look at that and make sure that the structure is right that will allow our ministries to continue to thrive? How can we leverage new technologies to support a wider range of participants? You heard Steve talk about this a little bit, and Lee. We ramped up very quickly in the early days of COVID. We started streaming services, streaming classes, conversation groups. For a little while, the primary way that you interacted with Trinity Cathedral was a virtual relationship. And we continued to keep a lot of that going. A number of new members of this congregation have a primarily virtual relationship with us, we might say. They may not live here in Portland. They may live somewhere else in the country, somewhere else in the world. They still access us as a place of belonging and community, often worship. What does that mean? That we are now a hybrid community, not just people in a room, but people dispersed throughout the world using new technologies to become a part of what we're doing in a different way. How will that shift this congregation? And how do we make sure that we're appropriately leveraging the new technologies available to us to make that happen? And how do we improve our campus? Lee referenced this a little bit in her report. You heard the warning about the roof over your head. So nobody hit too hard on the floor because this thing is very sensitive. But that's not just about the roof of Kempton Hall, right? We're using our space differently than we ever have before. Some of that was, being shut down for a while. That shifted how staff uses our offices, how the community uses the space. So that's a question we're asking. What are the things that we need a building for? And what do we need a building to be able to do? And what are some of the assumptions maybe that we would have made 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago about what a church building needed to be that are not operational anymore? How do we make sure that we're a building that can serve the church in the 21st century? So we've been doing a lot of work around racial justice as a community, asking some deep questions of our community. We did an audit of this community to find out all the different ways in which you identify, some demographic questions we had, and then also to listen more deeply to the experiences of those in this congregation who are not white. What has that been like? And what we discovered is there's a lot of interesting patterns at play in our communities, patterns that are life-giving and patterns that are less life-giving. And the Racial Justice Steering Committee or Task Force took all that information, spent a lot of time thinking about how racism functions in this community, how it has historically, how it continues to, what kind of a community we want to be. We want to be an anti-racist community. What will that look like in this context? They brought 19 recommendations forward to the vestry. The vestry's had a chance to look at this a little bit. One of the recommendations of the task force is there needs to be a group at Trinity continuing this work. The lifespan of a task force is a limited lifespan. And both from the Mission Institute, who conducted our racial justice audit, and the task force were unanimous in suggesting we need a group to kind of carry this work on an ongoing basis. So we thought, is that a commission? We have a music commission, we have an arts commission, we have a spiritual formation commission. Do we need an anti-racism commission? My sense is that the work of racial justice is not a program of the cathedral. And I get a little nervous when I start to think of it as as something that we program towards, as opposed to transformative work that we are doing as a community, and looking at our structures and all kinds of different ways in which racism is embedded, we might say, in this community. So we're doing something a little experimental. This is, again, kind of thinking about governance and how, how structure works. We're forming a racial justice steering committee. And one of the charges of that committee will be to receive these recommendations from the task force, and then to think, what is the permanent structure here? What is the ongoing way to ensure that this work does not just end up on a shelf in somebody's office somewhere, but continues to transform this congregation? And one of our experiments here, the usual way that things like this work is when a vestry task force delivers its report, it reports to the vestry. The vestry, marks it as confidential, and we spend a lot of time thinking about it, and then we'll sort of release to you what we want you to know. And one of the things that Greg Harris in one of our early meetings says, he says, that whole assumption about how vestry works and how decisions get made at Trinity, that in itself might be something that we want to think about in terms of a way that a white professional class culture tends to do business. What if we experimented with a different kind of transparency, a different kind of collaboration with the congregation, and just gave you the report? And so that's what's happening. The report from the task force is available to you online. I think, Arwen, I don't see Arwen. Yes, getting a thumbs up. Available to you online. If you go to the annual report page on the website, you'll see their full report. And it's, as Lee said, it's a 35-page document. It tells the story of where this congregation has been from our founding, really. Our land story is in that document. A lot of documentation around the work that we've been doing most recently as a community. And then 19 recommendations and we don't, some of those things are already happening. Some of those are programming decisions, staffing things that we're already implementing. Some of them are things that will be a real challenge to this congregation. But rather than decide in a small group which of those we feel comfortable for you to see, we're gonna just let it all be out there, because my sense is that the work of anti-racism is no longer the work of a small group on the vestry. This is now Trinity's work. It's always been Trinity's work, but we're handing it back to you as a congregation to take it and run with it. There will be some different ways that we organize around doing this work, and I'm happy to talk more about that in the weeks and months to come. But the most important thing for me to say to you today is, we don't know exactly what it's going to mean to move forward in this work. Our sense is it's going to be tricky, complicated, beautiful, and has the potential to really transform this congregation in ways that I cannot even imagine. That is your work. It is now your work to figure out how we move forward together. You've got some great leadership that's going to be coming alongside you. But that is this congregation's work, not the work of a small group of people making decisions on your behalf. How we'll do that remains to be seen. It's going to mean that we function, I think, a little bit differently in terms of the hierarchical, who reports to who kind of culture that has shaped this place. But that culture in itself, I think, is time to shift. So we'll see what that looks like. That's where we are on the racial justice work. We're also, as Lee said, thinking about our campus. An assessment, a group interviewed a bunch of different staff, ministry partners, learned a lot about how we use the buildings. Our key takeaway is that our current staff structure will not really support our hugely expanded efforts to become we might say a venue center, to make a lot of money off of the building. That's one thing that we've explored in previous generations. How do we monetize our space, if you like? How do we have more weddings? How do we have more events? How do we bring in more outside groups that will pay to use our space? And our sense is that work will continue, and the staff structure right now is really not in a place where we can support that effort as robustly as we would need to be if we were really going to take that work seriously. We would need to make some different staffing decisions. And frankly, we don't have the budget to hire the kinds of people who can run this place as an event center. So our sense is that's not a cash cow for us. That's not low-hanging fruits, although we've made some changes. We're making a lot more money off of our parking lot than we ever have before. So we continue to move forward in that question of how do we steward this building? How do we make sure that it's supporting our ministries and not just, a $2.5 million roof that needs to be replaced that's sucking money out of the budget? How do we make sure that this building is supporting us? Capital campaign is coming. A piece of the work of the vestry, a piece of the work of the congregation is that we want to be good stewards of what we've been handed. And a piece of that, as Steve said, is stewarding a building that, this building is 85 years old. It needs a different kind of care than it has in the past. So we want to make wise decisions about how we do that. We're asking some questions. We're experimenting with some different ways of operating when it comes to our staffing. We're asking, how many priests does Trinity really need? I have a lot of thoughts about that question. But right now we're doing it with 2 and an able team of associate clergy. Gail Greenwell stepped up this morning to preach. You're going to be seeing more of our associate clergy over the next several weeks. I am so thankful to these folks who are really stepping in and supporting Shanna and I as we attempt to do this work. The other piece of that work is that there's a lot of things that Shanna and I do and can do that you actually don't need just a priest to do. Sharissa Simmons is stepping into the interim role as our canon for spiritual formation. So you're going to be seeing a little bit more of Sharissa preaching, officiating at liturgies, responding to pastoral care concerns, doing a lot of pastoral care. She's actually done a lot of that for her whole career here. But because Sharissa is not ordained, that has tended to be hidden work. There is a lot of work that this staff does, and actually that members of this community do, that I would consider to be pastoral work, priestly work, we might say. So one of the opportunities of this experiment to staff a little bit differently is to see what a more robust framing of lay leadership might look like in this space. We're aware that there's some questions about pastoral care related to this. How do we make sure that members who require who are shut in, who are disconnected from the cathedral, how do we make sure that they are connecting with clergy? And that's an appropriate question to ask. There again, I think what I love to see, and I've started to see this happen, are parishioners who are taking it upon themselves to be that pastoral care person, right? To check in with their friends, to talk with them, to see them on a regular basis, to get trained as Eucharistic visitors so that when they go, they can bring the Eucharist with them and that person can continue to be connected to this congregation. And then to let Shanna and I know, hey, Rosemary really needs a visit. Could you go see her sometime this week? That's the best front lines of pastoral care that I know. And it's the way that a large congregation with lots of different pastoral situations, I think can appropriately care for each other without asking your clergy to do individual check-ins on 2,000 people. That's just a lot of people for Shanna and I to keep hands on. You are the arms of pastoral care in this community. Use us as resources. Help us to be where we need to be and to know what we need to know. The place that Trinity is going to receive the care that it needs, though, is this congregation. And you already do this, right? You build relationships of deep meaning here. When your life falls apart, many of you know the people that you can rely on, and many of them are the relationships that you have built in this space. This community is actually a deeply pastoral community, and a piece of what I want to invite you to see is we love our priests. We want to make sure that we're hiring good priests, and there's a lot that you all can do that we can support you in that you don't actually need to hire people to do. So that's an experiment that we're going to be seeing how that works over this next year. We're experimenting with technology in some different ways. We're saving $50,000 a year by not printing 300,000 printed pages of bulletins. That's a staff position. So by not printing bulletins, we have added a member of our staff. I think that's a better use of our resources, frankly. We're also saving a bunch of trees, 30 trees a year. I'm aware that not everybody loves online bulletins and that there's some questions about that. Is that always going to be the case? What about Christmas and Easter? What about funerals? Paper bulletins are, I suppose, more welcoming at one level to a visitor, right? It's a lot easier to hand somebody a piece of paper that walks them through the service than to, do you have a device that can access the internet and can you find this? So we're still working out the kinks on this, right? We are at the front edge. I don't know a lot of other churches who are moving in this direction. It's an experiment that we're running and it might fail. We don't know that yet. But I want to invite you for this next year to think about online bulletins as an experiment that we are running together. A piece of that is being willing to try stuff that makes you uncomfortable. There are 3 different ways now that you can access what's happening on Sunday morning. You can access the digital bulletin by scanning a QR code. Many of you have figured this out. We're still working out how the hymns work. There's a lot of pieces. They're not exactly where we want them to be. So that's going to continue to shift. But we're committed to getting that as good as we can get. You can also go completely analog. You don't have to have a device to worship at Trinity. The seasonal bulletins are in the pews, and between a seasonal bulletin and a hymnal, generally you have just about everything you need to follow a service. What you don't have are the readings. So that's where I invite you to go old school. Actually, the way that liturgy was designed to work, in our culture, we think to participate means I talk, right? That's how I know that I'm participating in a service, if I have lines. And if somebody takes away the means by which I know what my lines are, I start to get a little cranky. But liturgies asks a different kind of participation. You actually don't need to know all the lines. in order to experience the presence of God at Trinity Cathedral. So I would invite you, I'm going to be doing this in Lent. Don't tell anybody, I haven't entirely committed to this yet, but I think I'm going to try giving up my smartphone for Lent. I want to see if I can live without it. Not everybody can, right? Like that is not, I'm not imposing that on you. If you want to join me, I would love to know what that's like for you because I'm terrified of it. A piece of that though is I want to remember what it's like to engage in liturgy in a different kind of way. So I would invite you too, if you're struggling, right? Like maybe the online thing isn't working for you, just try for a Sunday, going through the service with just a hymnal. See what that's like. See how that changes your sense of participation. If you are fighting online bulletins tooth and nail and you have vowed to yourself and to your friends, I will never use my cell phone in church, I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath with me and try it. You can do it. You might not love it. You might come back to me in 6 weeks after Lent and say, I hated it. Here's all the reasons I hated it. I want to know, right? I want to hear this. Because as I say, I don't know if this is going to be our permanent way of doing it. We're saving a lot of money and we're saving a lot of trees. Those are really, really good things in my book. And every change, every experiment comes with some discombobulation. I remember Bud Thurston telling me about when they first started printing leaflets here at Trinity. And he said, a bunch of old ladies took me out to lunch and read me the Riot Act because I was not teaching people to use the Book of Common Prayer. So paper bulletins were anathema when they started here. That's living memory. For some of you, online bulletins are also anathema. Know that you are standing in the heritage of a long line of anathema folks who have not liked these kinds of innovations. You decide if those are the folks you want to side with. I leave that up to you. But we've always shifted how we engage liturgy on Sunday mornings. We are shifting it now again. That makes some of us hugely excited. The online leaflets have been a gift to a lot of people who are neurodivergent, people who have different kinds of abilities. There are plenty of folks who are loving that and actually have found that it allows them to participate in a whole different way. Others of us are really struggling with it. So it's a place where we're not of one mind as a community. That's okay. We can have diversity. We can have strong opinions as long as we stay in the room and we continue to be in dialogue with one another around it. So that's how I want to invite us to think about online bulletins. Jan, I see your question. I'm going to ask you to hold it for just a second. Oh no, I'm actually, you preempted me. That is exactly where I wanted to lead you. So Jan, take it away. What's your question? Yes, all. Yep. Some of us are visual people. Some of us are audio people. I get that, right? Some of us need to see it in front of us. So that will always be available to you. The readings will always be in the online bulletin. That's always going to be full text. Some of us actually, I suspect, might pay attention more easily if we're not looking at something. So that's where, we all learn in different ways. We all have different strengths. We want to be as open and accessible to as many different kinds of folks as we can. We're experimenting with that. We haven't perfected it yet. And I ask you to be patient with us as we continue to tweak. Yeah, Barbara. Yeah, just a second, Jen.
Is there a copyright fee when a hymn is in a...
That's, we have a license that allows us to redistribute things. Hymns are one of the areas though where the church is really lagged behind culture in terms of good online resources for hymnody. There are some hymns that you can't find online because of the rights around it. So we have a right to reproduce whatever we want under a one licensing fee, but that is a place where we're having to do a lot of extra work ourselves to get them. And, and they're hard to read. I mean, it's like, I think they're getting better, but we're still not perfect on this. Music doesn't reproduce as easily on a device as words do. We know that. We're working to find some ways to make that as seamless an experience as possible. But as I say, we're really on the front end. My sense is in 5 years, in 10 years, the church is gonna catch up to where we're trying to get, and there will be way better. It's just going to look a lot better and be a lot more intuitive, I think. We're pioneering something out here. And there are a lot of people who have eyes on us to see how we're making this work. Because there's a lot of folks that are interested in shifting a very sort of paper heavy print culture into something that's a little more engaged in different kinds of ways. So stay tuned. We don't know how all that's going to shuffle up. Yeah, Pam.
I would just like to say thank you to the staff, especially the ones handling all the live stream. For Terry's service, we probably had 700-800 people around the world looking at that service. And I heard nothing but raves about the clarity, and it allowed people to really feel as if they were participating. Good. with the notion that the bulletin is actually attached so that people can look at it. It was just superb.
Thank you.
And I have nothing but thanks from people who couldn't attend in person, but who wanted to participate. So I wanted to say thank you. It was really glorious.
Thank you. And it's a great illustration, I think, of the kind of community we're becoming, where some of us are going to continue to be in the room and others of us may never be in the room. And those folks have just as much right to be here. We have just as much obligation to be open, welcoming, and accessible to them as we can be. Some of that means using technology a little bit differently. But I would submit to you, that's a piece of what it means to be radically hospitable, is to engage technology in ways that reduce barriers for as many people as possible. That's what we're aiming for. We won't always get it right, but we're working to get better at that. Yeah, Jana, follow up?
Yes, and I'm open to Barry. Remember when we had little sheets and bulletins that had the scripture readings on them, the psalm on it, for the Sunday. They were like, you can find churches all over the country. We have these little pieces of paper, not full size, they have little sheets that have the scripture. And I think that would be a few of those for the people who may not have smartphones or have digital, like user devices. How they, when people are those available for people who are able to talk, but still might be able to read that.
Yeah, we're not gonna solve this morning in this conversation. Thank you for the suggestion. Arwen is the right person to refer that suggestion to, because as I say, we're working at getting better, and we've explored a lot of options like that. So watch in the back and see how this all works. But thanks to all of you for your willingness to work with us and to try stuff that makes you uncomfortable. I really admire the way that many of you are taking a deep breath and being like, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm really going to give it my college. I know it's not easy. I know that I don't love it when I go to a bar and I have to scan the QR. And that's where I'm like, gosh, I get what people are so upset about. And I think it's really important for us to try stuff like this, because this is the world that we're in now. I don't know where we're going to be in 5 years. We may go back to printing everything. Maybe, I don't know. We're trying some stuff. So thank you for your forbearance and your patience and your charity and your mercy with one another and helping other people around you figure this out. That's the kind of community I want us to be, where we're looking out for those around us, helping each other kind of navigate this thing. Because the most important thing on Sunday morning is not anything that we say from the pulpit. It's a feeling of belonging and safety that you experience when you're in that space. And so much of that is created by the people, not by the technology, not by the books that are in the pews, not by the hymns that we're singing. It's you all and the spirit you create. And when you embody a spirit of welcome and flexibility and good humor, this place comes alive. So thank you. Thank you.